The Musudafu Grand Hotel ballroom had been transformed into something that looked pulled straight from the pages of a hero fan magazine A-Euro. Which, honestly, was appropriate, given that nearly every person inside it had once graced the cover of one. Gold light poured from chandeliers overhead, casting a warm glow across round tables draped in white linen. A banner stretched across the far wall read UA Class 1A A-Euro. 5-year reunion, the letters done in the school's signature red and white. Someone A-Euro. Almost certainly Momo Jaguro's A-Euro. Had arranged fresh flowers at every table centerpiece, each one perfectly symmetrical, each one probably created from her own body that afternoon to save on the catering budget she had personally sponsored anyway. IZUKU Midoriya stood near the entrance with a glass of water he hadn't taken a single sip from, wearing a navy suit that Ochiko had picked out for him 3 weeks ago via a 17-message text thread that had also involved Tsuyu and, inexplicably, Katsuki Bakugo, who had responded to every suggested outfit with a single word: boring. 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 Fine. He was wearing the fourth option. He looked good, objectively. He had grown into his frame in the years since graduation A-Euro. The wiry, coiled energy of his school days had settled into something broader and more grounded. The freckles were still there, same as always, scattered across his nose and cheeks like a constellation that refused to change. His hair was the same barely controlled disaster it had always been. He was, at 23, ranked 5th among active pro heroes in Japan, operating under his own agency in Central Musudafu, and had twice been featured on the cover of Hero Weekly under headlines like The Next Symbol and Deku, Air 2 and ERA. He was also, at this precise moment, experiencing the specific social anxiety of a person who has arrived at a party exactly on time, which meant he was 15 minutes early by the internal clock of everyone else he knew. You look like you're guarding a door, said a voice beside him. IZUKU turned. Ochiko Uraraka materialized from the small crowd near the entrance, her cheeks pink from the warmth of the room, her brown hair pinned up with a few loose strands framing her face. She was wearing a deep rose dress and had the relaxed, easy confidence of someone who had learned A-Euro. 3 years of hero work and growing up A-Euro. That she could simply be wherever she was without needing to justify it. I'm not guarding anything, IZUKU said. You're standing in front of the door with your arms slightly apart, and your weight on your back foot. She tilted her head. That's guarding a door. He consciously shifted his posture. She laughed. Relax, Deku. It's just our friends. Right, he said. Right. Yeah. She took a glass of water from a passing server's tray and clinked it lightly against his. 5 years, she said, with the kind of weight that word deserved. 5 years, he agreed. They stood together for a moment, looking out at the room filling slowly with familiar faces. Eijiro Kirishima arrived in a suit that was somehow both extremely well-fitted and also had small flame detailing on the lapels, which he pulled off through sheer force of genuine enthusiasm. He walked in with Mina Ishido, who had come in a dress that was violently pink and perfect, and who immediately located the food table with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. Tenya Ida arrived exactly on time A-Euro. Real time, not social time A-Euro. And immediately began organizing the seating arrangements that Momo had already perfectly organized, because Tenya experienced the world as a series of systems that could always be improved upon. Momo let him do it. She had learned. Fumikage Tokoemi arrived alone, said 3 words to someone near the door, and then found a shadowed corner that suited him. Dark shadow peeked out from beneath his jacket, and waved at IZUKU across the room. IZUKU waved back. Shoto Todoroki arrived and immediately drew the attention of half the room without appearing to notice. He was wearing a white suit, which should have looked absurd and looked instead like something from a fashion editorial. He scanned the room, found IZUKU, and walked over with the direct purposefulness that characterized everything he did. You're standing at the door, Shoto said. I was, IZUKU said. I moved. You moved 4 inches. Ochiko covered her mouth to hide her smile. You look well, Shoto said, which from him functioned as a complete and earnest compliment. He shook IZUKU's hand with both of his, which was a habit he had developed sometime in his 2nd year, and had never dropped. IZUKU had always found it quietly moving A-Euro. The deliberate, two-handed warmth of someone who had learned affection intentionally rather than inherited it. You too, IZUKU said. How's Endeavor Agency? Shoto's expression performed a small, complicated journey. Functional, he said. Father is attempting to become a better person. It is a process. That's €. I did not come to discuss my father. He looked around the room. I wanted to see everyone. A pause. Also Bakugo told me there would be good food. As if summoned, Katsuki Bakugo arrived 7 minutes later and was immediately the loudest thing in the room that wasn't music. He had come with Kirishima €. They shared an agency now, something that the entire class had found deeply funny and deeply correct in equal measure €. And he was wearing a black suit with the top button of his shirt deliberately undone in a way that communicated both effort and disdain for effort simultaneously. He spotted Izuku from across the room and pointed at him. Izuku pointed back. This was, somehow, how they greeted each other now. It had developed organically sometime around year 2 after graduation, and neither of them had ever commented on it. The room filled gradually. Koji Koda arrived with a small bird perched on his shoulder that the hotel staff were too intimidated by his quiet, steady presence to ask him to remove. Rikido Sato had brought dessert €. An enormous layered cake in Class 1A colors that he carried in himself and that immediately generated a crowd. Mizo Shoji arrived, and Kyokujiro, who had recently released an album under a hero-adjacent music label that had charted in 3 countries. Denki Kaminari arrived with the specific energy of someone who has been looking forward to an event for weeks and intends to fully maximize it. Izuku talked to everyone. He laughed at old stories that had grown more elaborate in the retelling. He listened to updates about agencies and rankings and romances and apartments, and all the texture of lives being actively built by people he had grown up alongside. He felt, somewhere underneath the warm familiarity of it all, a specific kind of gratitude that he didn't quite have words for €. The gratitude of someone who had once been very alone and was no longer. It was somewhere around the 40-minute mark, during a conversation with Ida about proposed hero licensing reform, that he noticed her. He didn't know why it registered differently than the other arrivals. He had seen Toru Hagakure at various points since graduation €. The occasional joint agency event, a training seminar 18 months ago, the class group chat that Kaminari administered with chaotic enthusiasm. She was part of the fabric of their shared history, the same as everyone else, but there was a moment €. And he would think about this later, more than once €. Where he became aware of her presence in the room with a clarity that surprised him. It was partly the sound of her laugh. It carried across the low buzz of conversation from where she stood near Mina and Achiko, unrestrained and genuine, the laugh of someone who had heard something actually funny and wasn't performing amusement but feeling it. He had always known, in the abstract way you know things about people you've spent years in school with, that Toru laughed easily and often. But hearing it now, in this room, it landed differently. The other part was the conversation he fell into 45 minutes later, which he hadn't expected at all. He had stepped away from the main cluster to get a second glass of water €. He still hadn't finished his first €. And found himself near one of the tall windows overlooking the city. Musudafu at night was a familiar pattern of lights below, the skyline he had memorized from rooftops on patrol. "You always do that," said a voice beside him. He turned. There was no one visibly there. Then he remembered, as he always had to consciously remember, that Toru Hagakure was invisible and always had been. "Do what?" he said. "Find the edge of the room. The window, or the door, or the wall." He could hear the smile in her voice. It was a specific, lightly teasing quality that he'd heard before €. In class, during training €. But that he was registering now with more attention than he had previously. "You've been doing it all night. You find the center, you talk to people, and then you drift back to the edge." He considered that. "I didn't realize I was doing it. You do it on patrol too." "I've seen €. Well, I've noticed. On footage. From joint briefings." A small pause. "That sounded less strange in my head," he laughed. "No, it €. That makes sense. You pay attention to that kind of thing?" "I pay attention to a lot of things," she said. There was something in the way she said it that was light on the surface and had more weight underneath. Occupational habit, maybe. When you're invisible, watching is kind of your whole deal. He turned toward the window €. Toward where her voice was coming from €. And thought about that. Does it get strange? The watching without being watched part? A pause. Longer than the conversational ones. Sometimes, she said. It's useful. Obviously it's useful, €. It's basically my whole quirk, the not being seen part. But sometimes in a room full of people you'd like someone to notice you're there, not because you did anything worth noticing. Just €. She stopped. This is a weird thing to admit to at a reunion party. No, it isn't, he said. You're being polite. I'm really not, he said. I spent most of middle school being not noticed, and it was the worst part of every day. I can't imagine what that's like permanently. Another pause. Different quality, €. Something slightly more open in it. It's not permanent, she said. People know I'm there. It's more like €. I'm the variable they have to consciously account for. Most people don't think about things they can't see. Even people who like me, even good people. A beat. Wow, I am really going for it with the deep thoughts at this party. I'm glad you are, he said honestly. She laughed again. The one he'd heard across the room earlier. Up close it was warmer. They stood by the window for longer than either of them would have predicted. Two people who had spent 3 years in the same class and never really talked. Discovering that talking was surprisingly easy, she told him about her agency, €. Small, specialized, focused on infiltration and intelligence support. She had built something that played exactly to her strengths, and she described it with the quiet pride of someone who had made deliberate, good choices and knew it. He told her about his agency, the ongoing work of figuring out what DECU meant now that One for All had stabilized into something he understood rather than something he survived. She asked good questions. She listened the way people listen when they're actually interested and not just waiting for their turn. She pushed back on one thing he said, €. About hero visibility and public trust, €. With a point that was sharper and better considered than he expected, and when he said so, she said, You expected bad takes from me? And he said, No, I'm saying it was a good point, and she said, I know, I'm giving you a hard time, and the ease of that exchange was something he found himself turning over in his mind afterward. By the time Kaminari found them both to drag them back toward the main group for Sato's cake, they had been talking for almost an hour. Walking back into the warm center of the room, IZUKU found himself thinking, €. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way, but in the quiet, noting way of someone who has observed something worth remembering, €. That he had been looking at the same view of the city for 23 years and had somehow missed things that had been right in front of him, or, in this case, not in front of him at all. He smiled at that, privately, as Kaminari put a plate of cake in his hand and Kirishima started a toast that went 4 minutes longer than anyone expected and was somehow still not long enough. 5 years. He had barely started. The mission brief landed in IZUKU's inbox on a Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., which was 13 minutes before his alarm was scheduled to go off and approximately 4 minutes after he had already been awake, lying on the ceiling of his apartment. Not metaphorically. Literally on the ceiling. It was a one-for-all thing, €. A residual quirk that had surfaced about 8 months ago, some inherited fragment of a previous user's power that manifested when he was in that specific half-awake, half-dreaming state between sleep and consciousness. Gravity simply stopped applying to him for a few minutes each morning. He had learned to keep the ceiling clear of light fixtures that could be bumped, and to simply wait it out while scrolling his phone, floating gently 4 meters above his bed like a very tired balloon. His phone buzzed with the brief. He read it upside down. Joint Operation, €. Classified Level 3 Assigning Heroes, DECU, Midoriya IZUKU, Invisible, Hagakure Toru, Briefing, 0900 Commission Headquarters Nature, Infiltration and Asset Recovery. He read it twice. Then he drifted back down to his mattress as gravity reasserted itself, landed with a soft thump, and stared at the ceiling from the correct direction. Toru Hagakure. It had been 3 weeks since the reunion. The class group chat had been briefly chaotic afterward, €. Kaminari had posted 47 photos. Kirishima had written a paragraph-long message about how much he loved everyone that had generated 63 heart reactions, including one from Bakugo that he had definitely sent by accident and had not acknowledged, €. And then had settled back into its normal rhythm of memes and check-ins, and the occasional genuine moment of connection buried between jokes. Toru had been in the chat, same as always. She had reacted to things. She had posted one photo of her breakfast with the caption Invisible Girl. Visible eggs Benedict that had gotten more laughs than most things Kaminari intentionally tried to be funny about. He had not messaged her directly. There had not been a specific reason to. It had just been 3 weeks and they had talked at a party, and it had been a good conversation, and that was the entirety of what had happened. He was aware, as he showered and made coffee and read the mission brief more carefully, that he was assigning a significance to this assignment that a professional probably shouldn't. He went to the briefing anyway. Commission headquarters occupied the 14th through 19th floors of a tower in central Mizudafu that looked from the outside like a perfectly ordinary commercial building, which was the point. The interior was aggressively organized a everything white and gray and precisely labeled, the aesthetic of a place that took bureaucracy seriously as a form of competence. IZUKU arrived at 8:52. He signed in, collected his temporary clearance badge, and was directed to briefing room C on the 16th floor. Toru was already there. He knew this because her jacket was hung on the back of a chair and a coffee cup with a slight crescent of lipstick on the rim was sitting at the table beside an open folder. The chair was pushed slightly out from the table in a way that suggested someone was sitting in it. "Morning," she said from the direction of the chair. "Good morning," he said, and sat down 2 seats away in a move he immediately second-guessed as too formal, then decided was fine. "I saw your name on the brief this morning," she said. Her coffee cup lifted off the table and tilted slightly a. She was drinking from it. "Surprised me." "Me too," he said. "Good surprised or a? "Good surprised," she said, and he heard the smile in it. "You're easy to work with. I've seen your mission reports." "You've read my mission reports?" "I read a lot of mission reports," she said evenly. "Intelligence work." "It's homework." "Right." He opened his own folder. "What do we know so far?" The answer, as it turned out, was enough to be careful and not enough to be comfortable. The briefing officer arrived at exactly 9, and walked them through it with the brisk efficiency of someone who had delivered a lot of bad news in tidy packages. A mid-level villain organization a. Not one of the big names, not the kind that generated headlines, but the persistent, rooted kind that caused quiet damage over years a. Had acquired what was believed to be a cache of quirk suppression technology. Not the legal, regulated kind used in correctional facilities. The other kind, modified, weaponized, designed for targeted civilian use. The cache was being stored in a commercial warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. There was 1 confirmed guard rotation, 2 suspected internal security measures, and an unknown number of personnel on site at any given time. The Commission wanted the technology recovered and the storage operation documented for prosecution. 2 Hero team is intentional, the briefing officer said, clicking through a schematic of the warehouse floor plan. "We want minimum footprint. Invisible goes in first, confirms layout and personnel count, marks entry points. DECU provides exterior support, rapid response if extraction is needed." IZUKU studied the floor plan. "What's the structural composition of the walls?" "If I need to come in fast a. Standard reinforced commercial. You could go through it but you'd lose the quiet approach." "I won't need to go through it," Toru said, with a calm certainty that wasn't arrogance but was something close to its better-natured cousin. "I'll be in and out before anyone knows there was a mission." The briefing officer glanced in her direction with the expression of someone remembering she was there. It was a small thing a. A flicker a. But IZUKU noticed it. He suspected she did too. "We have full confidence in your approach, Invisible," the officer said, recovering smoothly. "The DECU component is standard protocol for any level 3 operation. Backup presence." "Understood," she said. After the briefing officer left, they spent 40 minutes at the table going over the floor plan in detail. Toru was methodical and precise in a way that surprised him a. She had clearly worked solo or in small units long enough to develop instincts he didn't have, different instincts, the kind built from the particular demands of moving invisibly through hostile space rather than meeting it directly. She pointed out 3 things in the floor plan that he had missed. He pointed out one that she had a secondary power junction that could kill the internal cameras if needed. She made a small sound of appreciation and marked it. "You do this kind of work often?" he asked. "Often enough. Intelligence support, mostly. I go in, I listen, I come out, I write the report. It's not glamorous but it's a. A pause. "It works. You make it sound smaller than it is. She was quiet for a moment. People expect heroes to be loud, she said finally. Big quirks, visible power, dramatic moments. I've spent my whole career being the one nobody films, the one the rankings don't know how to categorize. Another pause, lighter this time. It bothered me more when I was younger. What changed? I got better at the job, she said simply. It's hard to be resentful of what you are when you're genuinely good at it. He thought about that for longer than the conversation required. She moved on, back to the floor plan, pointing to the eastern loading bay with a gloved finger that she'd put on at some point €1. Practical, so he could follow where she was indicating. I'll enter here, she said. 20 minutes, maximum. I'll use this €1. She tapped the comm unit clip to her collar. €1. To relay position and count, you stay at this perimeter point until I call for either support or extraction, and if something goes wrong, then you come through the wall, she said, and he could hear her smiling. But it won't. It didn't, mostly. He stood at the perimeter point. €1. A shadowed alcove between two containers in the lot adjacent to the warehouse. €1. And listened to her voice in his earpiece as she moved through the building. She narrated in the low, controlled tone of someone who had done this enough to manage adrenaline as a tool rather than a distraction. Loading bay clear. 2 personnel, north corridor. Moving east. Camera coverage has a gap at the southeast corner, confirming your power junction assessment. Found it. 3 crates, marked for shipping. Taking documentation now. Hold €1. Additional personnel entering south. €1. Adjusting route. The last one made his shoulders tighten. He shifted his weight, ready, watching the building. Clear. Adjusting route confirmed. Continuing. Then, 4 minutes later, exiting. Eastern Bay. 30 seconds. He was at the Eastern Bay in 15. She materialized €1. Not literally, she was still invisible. €1. As a presence at his shoulder, slightly out of breath, the sound of careful movement stopped. Got everything, she said quietly. Any contact? None. They have no idea. A beat, something slightly lighter entering her voice now that the mission was done. I told you. They moved to the extraction point together, staying close, staying quiet. The city noise covered them. When they reached the street, and she dropped into the seat of their unmarked vehicle, IZUKU let out a breath he'd been rationing for 30 minutes. You were right, he said. I usually am, on my kind of missions. She wasn't gloating. €1. It was just a clean, factual statement. You were good out there. You went still when I needed you still. Some heroes can't do that. They want to move, want to act. You just €1. Waited. I've learned when to be loud and when not to be, he said. She considered this. It suits you, she said. The restraint. It reads as strength, not hesitation. He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he started the vehicle. They debriefed at Commission headquarters for an hour, submitted their documentation, signed the mission close reports. Toru's analysis of the interior layout was thorough enough that the case officer reviewing it commented on it twice. She acknowledged this without false modesty. In the elevator down afterward, she said, Are you hungry? Yes, he said, which was true. There's a ramen place 3 blocks east that I go to after missions sometimes. It's nothing special, but it's good. It was, as she said, nothing special. Low ceiling, 8 seats, a menu that was 4 items and a chalkboard of daily specials. The owner recognized her voice when she spoke and greeted her by name, which meant she was a regular in the truest sense of the word. They ordered. They sat. And somewhere over 2 bowls of ramen in a nothing special restaurant after a job done cleanly and well. IZUKU Midoriya felt the thing he had been not quite noticing for 3 weeks come into a little more focus. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. Walking back to the train station, shoulders loose, the debrief behind them and the evening ahead, she said, We should work together again. Yes, he said without hesitation. She made a small sound. €1. Please, he thought. I'll put in the request, she said. The city moved around them, loud and lit and continuous, and for the second time in 3 weeks IZUKU walked away from a conversation with Toru Hagakure thinking that he had been missing something obvious. He was starting to think he'd like to stop missing it. The 4th mission was the most complicated yet. €1. A multi-floor corporate building in which a white-collar villain operation had been laundering quirk enhancement drugs through a legitimate pharmaceutical distribution network. 3 floors of active personnel, security that was professional rather than intimidating, and a paper trail that needed to be physically located and copied rather than digitally extracted. Toru was in the building for 51 minutes. IZUKU spent every one of them at the perimeter, which he was getting better at. The stillness. The waiting. It ran against the deepest grain of his instincts. One for all was a power built for motion, for meeting force with force, for moving toward the problem. But he had learned, over these weeks, to understand the perimeter as its own form of readiness. Not absence of action. Potential action. Coiled and quiet and ready, like a spring that had not yet been released. Her voice in his earpiece was steady throughout. He had begun to be able to read the finer gradations of it. When she was moving carefully, when she was waiting, when something had surprised her but not alarmed her, when she was satisfied. That last one had a particular quality, a slight drop in her register, a controlled exhale before she spoke. He heard it at the 39-minute mark when she said located, copying now and again at the 51st minute when she said exiting, clean. He was at the extraction point before she finished the sentence. The debrief ran long. 51 minutes of footage from the micro camera she wore produced a lot of documentation. And by the time they were finished and out of the commission building, the city had moved past dinner into the quieter hours of early evening. The sky was a deep, clear blue above the lit geometry of buildings. Hungry? He asked, because it had become the natural end to these days. Starving, she said from beside him. They went back to the ramen place. It had become, without being formally decided, their place. The comma at the end of a mission, the decompression point. IZUKU had learned to sit consistently at the end of the counter where the space between stools was slightly wider, which made it easier to have a conversation with someone he couldn't see. A practical accommodation that had become habit. The owner. A compact, cheerful woman named Otaki-san who had run the restaurant for 20 years. Greeted them both by name now. She put 2 waters on the counter before they ordered. She had figured out, with the quiet perceptiveness of a person who had fed people for decades, exactly where Toru was sitting, and directed her conversation accordingly without making anything of it. IZUKU had noticed this and had found it unexpectedly moving. They ordered. The restaurant was quiet. 2 other customers at the far end of the counter, low music from a radio somewhere in the kitchen, the comfortable sounds of cooking. Outside, the city continued its evening at a reduced volume. You were in there a long time tonight, he said. 3rd floor archive was deeper than the layout suggested, she said. I had to revise my route twice. A pause. The kind that meant she was thinking about something specifically. There was a moment on the 2nd floor where one of the security guards stopped in the corridor for about 4 minutes. Just stood there. I don't know if he heard something or if he was checking his phone, or if he just needed a moment away from his desk. Another pause. I was 3 meters away from him the whole time. That's I wasn't scared, she said, before he could characterize it. I want to be accurate about that. It wasn't fear. It was just She paused, searching for the right word. Proximity. I was very close to someone who had no idea I existed in that moment, and there was a specific quality to that. You think strange things when you're invisible and still and 3 meters from a person who might, or might not have heard you. What did you think? A long pause. Their food arrived. Otaki-san placed Toru's bowl with comfortable accuracy. And there was the quiet interval of first tastes before she answered. I thought about how often that's been my whole life, she said. Not just on missions. Just being the person who's there but not registered. Who people know about but don't quite account for. She said it without self-pity, which made it land harder than self-pity would have. At UA it was fine. Everyone knew me, everyone was used to it, we'd all been through enough together that invisible became just a fact rather than a category. But before that, and in a lot of situations after I'm the variable people forget to carry. IZUKU ate his ramen and listened and didn't rush to fill the space. There was a mission briefing about 8 months ago, she continued. 12 heroes in the room. I was one of them. The briefing officer went around and made eye contact with everyone before he started. He made eye contact with 11 people. Her voice was steady and dry rather than wounded. I've gotten used to prompting I'll say something, clear my throat, Make some signal that I'm present, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just exist in a room without having to announce that existing. That shouldn't be something you have to do, IZUKU said. I know. But it is. He thought about this carefully, in the way he thought about things that mattered. When I was in middle school, he said, I was quirkless. Or everyone believed I was, and there's a specific kind of invisibility that comes with being the person everyone has decided doesn't count. It's not the same as yours, I know that, it's a different kind of not being seen, But I remember what it felt like to be in a room and know that your presence had been pre-categorized as not relevant. He set down his chopsticks briefly. I'm sorry that's been your experience. Consistently? For your whole career. A silence. Different from the ones before it. You're the first person who's ever put it in those words, she said. Her voice had changed slightly. Not fragile, exactly. More like something had been carefully set down. It's just true, he said. I know. It's still She stopped. Thank you. They ate in companionable quiet for a while. Outside, a group of people passed the restaurant window, laughing about something. The radio in the kitchen played something low and instrumental. Can I ask you something? Toru said. Yes. What made you want to be a hero? I know the broad version, Everyone knows the broad version. The Deca origin story has been in 3 documentaries, But I mean the actual true version, the one underneath the version you tell journalists. He considered this. The version underneath, he said slowly, is that I wanted to be the kind of person who ran toward people who were scared. Not toward the fight, specifically, toward the person who needed someone to show up. He turned his water glass in his hands. There was a specific moment, I was maybe 4 years old, and I saw a hero arrive at an accident, and the person who was hurt, their face just changed. When the hero got there, like the worst part was already over because someone had come. He paused. I wanted to be that. The arrival that changes someone's face. Toru was quiet. That's the real one, he said. I know, she said. I can tell the difference. A beat. Mine is smaller. I wanted to prove that invisible didn't mean absent, that you could be completely unseen and still be the most important person in the room. Her voice had the particular texture of something honestly held. I wanted the work to speak. Because I couldn't make myself visible, I decided the results would be. That's not smaller, IZUKU said. It feels smaller, compared to It isn't, he said, with enough quiet firmness that she stopped. What you described is the same thing. Showing up. Making your presence matter. Changing the outcome. He looked toward where she was sitting. You've been doing it this whole time. Another silence. This one had a warmth to it. You're very earnest, she said finally, and her voice had shifted into something lighter, something affectionate in a way that was careful not to announce itself. Genuinely, really, actually earnest. It's one of the things about you that looked like a weakness when we were kids and turns out to be the opposite. People keep being surprised by that, he said. Because earnestness is unusual, she said. Most people armor it by the time they're adults. You just kept yours. A pause. It's good. I mean that plainly. He felt, with a clarity that was slightly alarming, that she did mean it plainly. There was no performance in it, no social texture, just the straightforward delivery of an honest observation from a person who had apparently been watching him with more attention than he'd realized. He thought about the reunion. He thought about the briefing officer who had looked at 11 people. He thought about being 3 meters from someone who doesn't know you're there, and what you think about in that stillness. Next time, he said, if there's a briefing officer who skips you, tell me. I'll say something. A long pause. You don't have to do that. I know, he said. I'd like to. The silence that followed was the kind that has something living in it. Neither of them addressed it directly. They finished their ramen. Otaki-san refilled their waters without being asked. The radio played something that might have been jazz. When they left, they walked the first block in comfortable quiet, the city easy around them. At the intersection where their routes diverged, she went east toward the train line, he went north. They stopped. Same time next mission, she said. Same time, he agreed. She went east. He went north. At the corner he paused for a moment without fully meaning to, and it occurred to him that he had spent the last 2 hours in genuine, easy, unguarded conversation with someone who he had known for years without knowing at all. He had been listening to her voice in his earpiece for 6 weeks. Calm and precise and occasionally dry and sometimes quietly carrying more weight than the words themselves. And he was increasingly aware that listening to it had become something he looked forward to. He walked home. He thought about what she'd said. About wanting the work to speak. About being invisible and still being the most important person in the room. He thought, she already is. He thought, she probably doesn't know that I think so. He thought for the first time with any real specificity and without immediately setting the thought aside, I'd like her to know. IZUKU had a problem. It was not a villain problem, which would have been straightforward. It was not an agency problem or a paperwork problem or a quirk management problem, all of which had established protocols and clear steps toward resolution. It was not even the ceiling problem, which at least followed predictable patterns and could be managed with a cleared ceiling and patience. It was a Toru problem. Specifically, he could not stop noticing her, not in the way he hadn't noticed her before. The casual, peripheral awareness of someone who exists in your extended circle and registers as present without registering as significant. This was the opposite of that. This was the specific, inconvenient hyper-awareness of someone whose brain had decided, without asking permission, that a particular person was worth paying attention to, and had begun doing so with an enthusiasm that was frankly disproportionate to the situation. He noticed when her name appeared in the group chat. Not in a searching way. He wasn't scrolling looking for it. But in the way your eye finds a familiar word on a page without trying. She posted irregularly, usually something dry and specific and funnier than it announced itself to be, and he had caught himself reading her messages twice. Not because they were unclear the first time. He noticed, on a Tuesday, that he could identify her laugh in a recording from a joint agency social event he hadn't attended, which meant he had apparently memorized the precise acoustic quality of her laugh to a degree that allowed pattern recognition. This seemed excessive. He noted it and moved on without fully moving on. He noticed that he had begun, when writing his mission reports for their joint operations, to include specific observations about her approach and methodology that went beyond what the report format required. Professional admiration, he had told himself initially. Then he had reread one of the reports and found a paragraph describing the way she navigated a corridor under pressure. With a quality of controlled certainty that suggests complete integration of her quirk into her physical self-concept, moving as though invisibility is not an absence but a presence. And had sat with that for a moment before accepting that this was not, strictly speaking, professional admiration anymore. He did not panic about any of this. He was 23 and had survived things considerably more alarming than developing feelings for someone. He was also, by temperament, someone who processed things by looking at them directly rather than away. So he looked at it directly. He liked Toru Hagakure. He liked the way she talked. Precise and honest and occasionally equipped with a dry edge that arrived without warning. He liked the way she thought about her work, the seriousness underneath the lightness, the specific pride of someone who had built something real on their own terms. He liked the conversations at Otaki-san's counter that moved from mission debriefs to genuine territory without a seam between them. He liked her laugh that he had apparently memorized. He liked her. Having established this, he did what he always did with complicated things. He made a mental list of relevant factors. Factor 1. They were colleagues. Professional relationship, shared operational profile, commission-designated standing partnership. Introducing a personal dimension had implications. Factor 2. He didn't know how she felt. He had limited data. She was warm with him, easy and unguarded in their conversations, had called his earnestness good and meant it. She had suggested working together again before he had. She texted him occasionally now outside of missions. Nothing significant, small things. A photo of a hero-themed vending machine she'd found with the caption "They made one for everyone but me," which had made him laugh out loud on the train. A recommendation for a documentary about quirk evolution she thought he'd like, which he had. None of this was conclusive. Toru was a person who paid attention and responded accordingly. That was her nature, not necessarily a signal. Factor 3. He genuinely, in a way that had nothing to do with his own feelings, did not want to complicate something that was already good. Their working relationship was good. The easy rhythm of their conversations was good. Whatever this was between them, as it existed right now, was good. He was aware that the act of wanting more could damage what was already there. He sat with these factors on a Wednesday evening on his apartment floor a He did his best thinking on the floor, which Achiko had once said was the most Deka thing about him a and arrived at no particular conclusion except, pay attention and don't rush. He was good at paying attention. He had been paying attention his whole life. The thing was, the more attention he paid, the more there was to notice. He noticed it at the joint agency training session on a Thursday morning a combined exercise involving 4 hero teams working through a simulated hostage scenario. Toru was on the opposing team, playing the role of an infiltrator who needed to reach a target before the defenders could lock down the space. IZUKU was on the defense team. He found her in 4 minutes. Not by seeing her a Obviously not by seeing her. By listening. By paying attention to the way air moved in the corridor, the way sound distributed in a room, the particular stillness that surrounds someone who is trying very hard not to make noise. He had been on enough missions with her to know the shape of her movement, the rhythm of her careful steps, the tiny pause before she changed direction. He put his hand gently on the wall to his left and said quietly, I know you're there. A pause. You're cheating, she said, from approximately 1 meter away. I'm paying attention, he said. Another pause. Then, with something that sounded like genuine curiosity underneath the competitive annoyance, how? I know how you move, he said. There was a silence that lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then the exercise coordinator's voice came over the comm announcing a scenario reset, and the moment dissolved into the noise of teams regrouping, and IZUKU went back to his position. But he caught, in the half-second before the corridor got busy, a small sound from where she'd been standing. Not quite a word. More like the beginning of one, reconsidered. He thought about it more than the exercise warranted. He noticed it again at the class group outing the following week a Not a formal reunion, just Kaminari deciding on a Saturday afternoon that everyone should go bowling, which had resulted in a highly chaotic evening at a bowling alley in central Mizudafu that also inexplicably had a karaoke component. Toru bowled well. He knew this because the ball moved and the pins fell and she made a sound of satisfaction each time that he was, yes, still capable of identifying in a noisy room. She bowled 3 strikes in a row at one point, which caused Kirishima to make a noise like a malfunctioning car alarm and caused Bakugo to accuse someone of cheating without specifying who or how. IZUKU bowled adequately. He was not a natural at bowling a The problem was that he approached it with the same focus he applied to everything, which resulted in overthinking the physics of the release to a degree that was unhelpful. Toru, from beside him on the bench while he was calculating approach angles, said quietly, You're doing the thing where you think too much. I'm not a You have the same expression you get when you're revising a mission plan mid-approach. Very focused. Very determined. It's a bowling ball, Midoriya, he bowled. Got 8 pins. See, she said. 8 is good. You got 3 strikes. I don't think about it, she said. I just throw the ball. That can't be the actual advice. It is, though. He could hear her settling back against the bench, relaxed and amused. Not everything rewards more analysis. Sometimes you just do the thing. He sat back down and considered this in the context of more than bowling. Later, during the karaoke portion a which had been Mina's idea and which Kaminari had embraced with a commitment that should have been alarming a Toru sang. She had a good voice, genuinely, clear and confident, and she picked a song he half recognized from somewhere and delivered it with the particular ease of someone who is completely unself-conscious about the thing they're doing. She got a standing ovation from Kirishima, which was meaningless because Kirishima gave standing ovations to everything, and a genuine round of applause from everyone else, which was not. IZUKU clapped and found that he was smiling in a way that had nothing to do with the performance, and everything to do with the performer. Mina appeared at his elbow from nowhere. Hey, she said, with the energy of someone who has noticed something and has decided not to pretend otherwise. Hey, he said neutrally. She looked at him. He looked at the karaoke screen, which was now displaying Kaminari queuing up something catastrophic. Interesting, Mina said. What is? Nothing, she said, and moved away with the smile of a person who has filed information for later use. The fifth mission came on a Friday, shorter than the others €. A quick document verification, in and out, 90 minutes from briefing to debrief, clean and uneventful in the way that well-executed operations were, which was to say it required significant skill to make it look like nothing. Afterward, they went to Otaki-san's. Habit, routine, the comfortable comma. The evening was warm. The restaurant had its door propped open, and city air moved through €. Not quite a breeze but the suggestion of one. They sat at their usual end of the counter, and ordered without looking at the menu because they had both memorized it by now. Otaki-san put their waters down, and then put a small dish of pickled vegetables between them without being asked, which she had started doing about 2 weeks ago. Another small accommodation, extended without announcement. She's figured out where I sit, Toru said, with something fond in her voice. She's perceptive, IZUKU said. She is. She reminds me of €. She stopped. It's going to sound strange. Tell me. She reminds me of you, Toru said. The way she just €. Accounts for me. Without making it a thing. Without the little pause people do when they're remembering I'm there. A beat. You don't do the pause. He thought about this. I stopped doing it after the second mission, he said honestly. I started thinking of your voice as the location rather than €. Adjusting for the absence of visual, a silence. That's a very specific thing to say, she said quietly. Is it strange? No, she said. It's €. She paused for a long moment. It's actually exactly what it should be. It's just not what I'm used to. He looked at the space beside him where she was €. Where her coffee cup sat, where the slight warmth of proximity was, where her voice came from. He thought, I know how you move. I know your laugh in a crowded room. I know which pauses mean you're thinking and which mean you're deciding. I know that you're proudest when the work speaks and quietest when you wish it spoke louder. He thought, I know you're there. He didn't say any of it. It was too much, too suddenly, for a ramen counter on a Friday evening, but he noticed all of it, clearly and without looking away, and understood that the list of relevant factors he had made on his apartment floor was no longer a list of reasons to wait. It was a list of things he was going to have to do something about. Not tonight, but soon. Walking to the train, the warm evening around them, Toru said. Same time next mission. Same time, he said. Then, before he fully decided to, Toru, she stopped. He stopped. Yeah? She said. Her voice had a particular quality, €. Not quite careful, not quite open, something balanced precisely between the two. He had gotten as far as her name without knowing what came next. He looked at the city, the lit, continuous, unhurrying city, and thought about bowling balls and not thinking too much and just doing the thing. Nothing, he said. Have a good weekend. A pause. You too, Midoriya, she said. She went east. He went north. He thought soon. The thing about almost saying something is that afterward, the almost sits in the room with you. IZUKU spent the weekend aware of it. Not painfully €. It wasn't regret exactly, more like the specific awareness of a door he had walked up to and then stood in front of without opening. He had said her name, he had meant to follow it with something. He had not followed it with something, and she had said you too, Midoriya in that balanced, careful voice, and they had gone their separate ways into the warm evening. He replayed it a moderate number of times. He was self-aware enough to recognize that a moderate number in this context was still more than was strictly useful. On Saturday he went to his mother's for dinner, which was grounding in the way that returning to the place you grew up always was €. The same kitchen smell, the same chair that creaked, the same way Inko Midoriya looked at him like he was simultaneously her proudest accomplishment, and someone she still occasionally worried had not eaten enough. You're quiet, she said over dinner. I'm always quiet. You're a different kind of quiet tonight. She passed him more rice without asking if he wanted it. Work? No, work is good. Friends? Friends are good. She looked at him with the specific perceptiveness of a mother who had been paying close attention to this particular person for 23 years. Someone, she said, not quite a question. He looked at his rice. IZUKU, it's not €. I haven't done anything about it yet, she smiled. It was the smile of someone who has waited patiently for a specific thing, and has just been informed it has arrived. Tell me about them. He thought about what to say. About how to compress the thing accurately without losing its shape. She's a hero, he said. We've been working together. She's a euro. He paused, trying to be precise. She sees things clearly, the way she understands a situation, a room, a person a euro. She pays more attention than almost anyone I've met, and she does something with what she sees. She doesn't just observe. She acts on it. He turned his water glass. And she's been a euro. I don't know. Overlooked. In ways that aren't fair, and she's handled it with more grace than I think I would have. His mother was quiet for a moment. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She is, he said. I think I've only just started knowing her properly. Then start, Inko said simply. He nodded. After dinner, walking back to the train, he made a decision that was less a dramatic resolution than a quiet acceptance of what had already been true for several weeks. He was going to tell her, not because certainty about the outcome. He had no certainty about the outcome a euro. He had that balanced, careful pause when he'd said her name, which could mean anything, and a collection of moments that felt significant but could be the significance of good friendship rather than something else. He had incomplete data, but he had also, at 4 years old, seen a hero arrive and watched someone's face change, and had understood in that moment that the most important thing was simply to show up, to not let fear of the outcome stop you from appearing. He had built a whole life on that principle. He was not going to stop now because of a bowling alley and a ramen counter, and a name he had said without finishing the sentence. The opportunity arrived before he had fully planned what he would say, which was, in retrospect, probably better. It was a Thursday. No mission scheduled, no joint briefing, nothing official. He had been in the commission building for a separate debriefing that had run long, and was coming out through the main lobby when he nearly a euro. Not literally, obviously a euro. Walked into her. Oh, she said, from approximately half a meter in front of him. He felt the slight brush of her sleeve against his arm as they both stopped. Sorry, a euro. I wasn't watching a euro, neither was I, he said. Hi. A beat. What are you doing here? Debrief ran late. Dropping off mission documentation. I prefer to do it in person rather than the digital system a euro. The physical record is more reliable for the kind of work I do. A pause. I was about to get coffee. There's a place around the corner. I know the one, he said. Another pause. The lobby moved around them a euro. Other heroes, commission staff, the ordinary traffic of a building that functioned all day. Do you want to come? She said. Yes, he said. The coffee place was small and serious about its coffee a euro. The kind of establishment that had strong opinions about extraction time and presented them on a chalkboard above the counter. They ordered and found a table near the window overlooking the street. It was different from Otaki-san's. No mission behind them, no debrief in front of them, no operational context. Just Thursday afternoon and coffee and the city outside. They talked about ordinary things first. He told her about the debrief that had run long and the particular exhaustion of bureaucratic processes that required repetition. She told him that she had started running in the mornings along the river route and that it was, so far, the best and worst decision she had made recently. He asked why worst, and she said her alarm went off at 5:30, and that should be self-explanatory. He laughed. She laughed. Then there was a pause a euro. Not uncomfortable, they had gotten well past uncomfortable pauses, but one with a different texture, one where both of them seemed to understand that there was something on the table that wasn't coffee. He looked at the window. Outside, a woman was walking a dog that had stopped to investigate something of enormous apparent interest on the pavement. Toru, he said. Yeah, she said. Same balanced quality as before. Careful and open at once. I want to say the thing I didn't say last Friday, he said. A pause. Okay, she said quietly. He had imagined this moment with more preparation. With a clearer structure, a more organized sequence of points. What actually came out was less organized and more true, which was probably better. I've been paying attention, he said. These past weeks. And I know that's what we do a euro. That's both of our jobs, paying attention a euro. But this has been a euro. Different. I pay attention to you differently than I pay attention to mission parameters. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I notice your laugh in loud rooms. I notice which pauses mean you're thinking and which mean you're deciding something. I know how you move and I can identify you in a corridor without seeing you, which I told you as a professional observation during the training exercise but which is actually €. More than professional, he looked toward her. I like you? In the specific way that means I'd like to know if there's any possibility you might feel something similar, and if you don't, I want to be absolutely clear that I mean it when I say it won't change how I value working with you and I won't make it strange. I'm not good at being strategic about feelings, so I'm just telling you the true thing. Silence. The street outside continued. The dog finished investigating and moved on. I noticed things too, she said. Her voice was quiet. Not the careful, balanced quiet. Something more open than that. Something that had put down whatever it was carrying. You sit so I can always have the end of the counter, she said. You figured out that I can follow a conversation better when I'm not in the middle of a group. And you position yourself so there's always a clear line between you and me, and you've never once done the pause. A breath. You said you knew how I moved? I know how you think. I can tell when you're about to say something true versus something polished. I can tell when you're listening versus waiting. You listen. Another breath. That's rarer than people realize, and I've been aware of it every time we've talked. He waited. I've been trying, she said carefully, not to assume. Because people are kind to me and I've sometimes read more into kindness than was there. Because I am €. I am so used to being overlooked that when someone genuinely sees me it can be hard to tell if it means something or if I'm just relieved. The honesty in this was complete and slightly breathtaking. So I've been cautious. About what I was noticing. What did you notice? He asked gently. That I wanted the missions to run long, she said, so we'd end up at Otaki Sands. That I checked the group chat more since we started working together. That when you said I know you're there in that corridor I stood still for about 10 seconds afterward, and that had nothing to do with the training exercise. A pause. That I thought about you on a weekend and it wasn't mission-related. The city outside was absolutely ordinary. Traffic and pedestrians and an autumn afternoon that had no idea it was significant. I like you too, she said. In the specific way you described. Yes. He exhaled. He hadn't fully realized he was holding his breath. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. A beat. That was a lot, she said. Sorry, €. No. He could hear the smile breaking through. That was a lot in a good way. You're a lot in a good way. You always have been, I just wasn't €. Paying attention in the right direction. Neither was I, he said. They sat with it for a moment, this new thing between them, still warm from being said out loud and not yet fully understood in all its dimensions. Outside the dog had returned to the spot of interest, and its owner had given up resisting. I want to do this properly, he said. If that's all right. Not just €. Acknowledging it, but actually €. A date, she said. Yes. Midoriya IZUKU asking me on a date, she said, with a quality in her voice that was wondering in the best sense of the word. Okay. Saturday? He said. I know a place that isn't a ramen counter or a coffee shop that's serious about extraction time. She laughed. The one he knew. Saturday, she said. He walked back to his agency afterward through the ordinary Thursday city, hands in his pockets, and thought about the principle that had organized his entire life, €. Showing up, arriving, being the thing that changes someone's face from afraid to not afraid. He thought that it applied to more than villain fights. He thought that sometimes the bravest arrival was to a table near a window with a cup of coffee, and the true thing said out loud without a net under it. He thought she said yes. He walked the rest of the way home with his face doing something he was glad Bakugo couldn't see. The date was a bookshop. Not a restaurant, not a Hero District rooftop with a view, not anywhere that required a reservation or carried the specific pressure of a place designed for romantic occasions. A bookshop, €. 3 floors, slightly cramped aisles, the particular smell of paper and time, located on a quiet street in a part of the city that tourists didn't know about, and locals treated with the protective affection of something undiscovered. IZUKU had found it 2 years ago during a patrol and had gone back 7 times since. He had not told anyone about it, which said something about what kind of place it was to him. He told Toru. She arrived at the agreed corner at 2 in the afternoon on Saturday, announced by the sound of her footsteps and the small laugh she gave when she saw him standing in front of the shop window. A bookshop, she said. Is that all right? It's perfect, she said, with a certainty that made him believe it. I've always loved bookshops. Nobody looks at you in a bookshop. Everyone's looking at the shelves. He hadn't thought of it that way. He filed it next to everything else he was filing about her. They went in. It was, as he had known it would be, easy. Easier than it should have been for a first date between two people who had been circling something unspoken for weeks. But then, he thought, maybe that was exactly why. The circling had done the preliminary work. The mutual confession at the coffee table had removed the specific anxiety of not knowing. What remained was simply two people who already liked each other, moving through a bookshop, learning adjacent things. She went straight for the natural sciences section, which surprised him. She pulled out a book on bioluminescence deep-sea creatures, living light and said, I've been interested in this since I learned my own light refraction mechanism. The physics overlaps. She said it conversationally, as though this was the kind of thing everyone thought about, which he suspected she had learned to do to avoid making people feel like they should be more curious than they were. He was more curious than they were. They spent 40 minutes in that section alone. He showed her the hero history shelf on the third floor. Not the popular retrospectives, the serious academic ones that nobody bought, and the shop kept stocking anyway because the owner had opinions. She pulled one out and read the back with the focused attention of someone who was actually evaluating it. Have you read this one? She asked. The third chapter is the best thing written about post-war quirk regulation, he said. She bought it. He bought the bioluminescence book. They got coffee from a cart outside afterward and walked without a particular destination. The Saturday city relaxed around them. She told him about growing up with an invisible quirk. Not the harder parts, those had come at Otaki-san's, but the stranger parts, the funny parts. The way her family had developed an elaborate set of household signals to account for her presence. The way she had once frightened a plumber so badly that he had knocked over an entire toolbox. He told her about the notebooks. About being the kind of child who responded to not having a quirk by analyzing everyone else's, filling volumes with observations and diagrams as a way of staying connected to a world that had decided he wasn't part of it. I still have all of them, he said. How many? He paused. Toru. How many, Midoriya? Enough that I don't say the number out loud in casual conversation. She laughed for a long time. He let her. By the time the afternoon had moved into early evening, they had covered approximately 3 kilometers of city without noticing and had arrived, by some navigational instinct, in the neighborhood of Otaki-san's. They looked at each other. At the space between them where looking at each other was, practically speaking, dinner? He said. Obviously, she said. Otaki-san greeted them, and then did something she had never done before. She put a small candle on the counter between their places. Just a small one, in a glass holder. She lit it without comment and went back to the kitchen. Toru was quiet for a moment. She knows, she said. She's perceptive, he said. She's wonderful, Toru said softly. They had dinner. The candle burned between them. The city did its city things outside. It was, IZUKU thought, almost alarmingly good. Not in a high-drama way, not in the way of cinematic moments designed to be remembered, but in the quiet way of something that fits, something that has found its right shape. Walking to the train afterward, she reached out and found his hand, not tentatively. Just directly, in the way she did most things, and held it. He held it back. The class group chat found out approximately 9 days later. He had not planned to announce anything. He had simply been at a point where not mentioning it felt like its own kind of